It's funny how one conversation can just change everything. I remember leaving this job, this solid six-figure paycheck at Global Tech Solutions, throwing it all away to chase a dream at a startup I barely knew. And why? Because one man, just one, looked me in the eye and said he believed in me. Sounds crazy, right? Impulsive, maybe even stupid. But back then, honestly, felt like fate. Like after years whispering about this idea in quiet corners, sketching it out in forgotten notebooks while drowning in corporate bureaucracy, someone finally saw it. Saw me. I wasn't looking for another rung on the ladder, another fancy title to pad my resume. What I wanted, what I needed, was to build Sentinel AI, to bring it into the world. And I needed fertile ground, a place where something that radical could actually take root and grow. That place, I thought, was Apex Innovations. They weren't the titans of cybersecurity, not then, but they were hungry, agile, flush with funding. And crucially, they had Marcus Thorne. Marcus, he was the kind of CEO who projected this aura of effortless confidence. The kind who, when I laid out the vision for Sentinel AI, needing dedicated server farms, an unrestricted development sandbox, resources that would make Global Tech Solutions laugh me out of the room, he didn't flinch. He just leaned back in his plush leather chair, steepled his fingers, and said the words that sealed the deal for me. "Evan," he said, his voice smooth as polished wood, "I'm not investing in a product. I'm investing in a visionary." And just like that, I was the visionary. Evan Carter, an AI systems architect specializing in something most people hadn't even heard of yet, behavioral cybersecurity. Sentinel AI. It had lived inside my head, evolving on countless pages of schematics and code snippets for almost 4 solid years. I'd pitched a rough concept twice at Global Tech. Both times it got sidelined. Too ambitious, they said. Too far ahead of the curve. Too risky. At Apex, Marcus Thorne greenlit it in 30 minutes. Half an hour. I can still feel the warmth that spread through my chest in that meeting, chasing away years of corporate chill. The way he made it sound like we were partners, pioneers. "Let's build something the world's never seen," he'd declared. That single sentence ignited something in me, a fire I thought had died down to embers long ago. I packed up my life, moved into a tiny studio apartment just a couple of blocks from the Apex offices. Canceled subscriptions, cut ties, basically went dark. My world shrank down to code, algorithms, simulations. Nights bled into weekends, weekends blurred into months. I poured every waking moment, every ounce of energy, into Sentinel AI. Every time I hit a technical wall, felt the code refusing to bend to my will, I didn't back down. I leaned in harder, not because Marcus was cracking a whip, not because of some looming deadline, but because I believed. Deep down, bone-deep belief. Not just in Sentinel AI as some revolutionary product, but in its purpose. The digital world was shifting under our feet faster than anyone wanted to admit. Old defenses, firewalls, static rule sets, they were becoming obsolete. The threats weren't just banging on the front door anymore. They were slipping through the cracks, morphing, learning. Attacks were becoming adaptive, behavioral, almost alive. We needed a shield that could think like the attacker, anticipate its moves, learn its patterns, and neutralize it before the damage was done. That was Sentinel AI. And for the first time in my entire career, I had everything I needed. The freedom to innovate, the resources to build, and the backing, or so I thought, to make it real. Was I scared? You bet. Leaving stability for a startup is always a gamble. But more than fear, I felt awake, alive. This wasn't just changing jobs. It was a seismic shift in my life. A full-throated yes to the part of me that craved creation over comfort, impact over inertia. Standing in my new, empty office that first morning, sunlight streaming across a pristine whiteboard just waiting for ideas. I remember whispering it to myself, a promise and a prayer. This is it. This is where it begins. 18 months. That's what it took. 18 months of 80-hour weeks minimum. Zero social life, zero distractions, zero balance. Just me, the machine, and the mission. People romanticize passion, don't they? They talk about it like it's this cozy, glowing warmth inside you. But real passion, the kind that drives you to build something truly new, something that pushes the boundaries, is not cozy. It's raw. It's relentless. It strips you down, demands everything, takes and takes until all that's left is the work itself. And I gave it everything I had. I wasn't just stringing together lines of code. I felt like I was weaving consciousness. Sentinel AI wasn't designed to be a passive gatekeeper, waiting for instructions. It was meant to observe, to learn, to anticipate, to evolve. It started with modeling threat behaviors, teaching the AI the subtle fingerprints of intrusion, the ways attackers disguised their digital footsteps. Then came the dynamic defense logic, designed to shift and adapt in real time like a biological immune system responding to a virus. Layer upon layer, predictive learning engines, vast data lakes for analysis, real-time simulation environments to test its mettle. And underpinning it all, a constantly refining ethical core, a digital conscience I programmed to ensure it always served protection, never exploitation. Every algorithm had a reason. Every late-night debugging session added resilience. Every skipped meal, every forgotten appointment, it all fueled the machine. I stopped checking social media entirely, missed friends' weddings, let birthdays slide by unanswered. My gym membership lapsed. I didn't even notice until months later when they sent a final bill. My apartment? Yeah, it basically became a glorified incubator for empty takeout boxes and towers of unwashed coffee mugs. But honestly,
it didn't cut it.
Because every time I ran a simulation and Sentinel AI responded faster, smarter, more intuitively than the time before, it felt like witnessing a miracle, like watching something impossibly complex draw its first breath. There were nights, plenty of them, where I'd suddenly look up at the harsh fluorescent lights humming overhead and realize I hadn't actually spoken a word out loud for 12, maybe 14 hours. Just the click-clack of my keyboard, the low thrum of the servers in the cooled room next door, the cascade of data scrolling across my monitors. It was an intense isolation, the kind that probably would have broken a lot of people. But for me, in that specific time and place, it felt like purpose distilled. Like I'd finally found the one thing worth pouring my entire existence into. Marcus Thorne would swing by my lab occasionally, always with that smooth, polished confidence that politicians smile. He'd lean against the doorframe, arms crossed, surveying my chaotic domain. Incredible progress, Evan, head say, the compliment sounding practiced, rehearsed. The board is extremely impressed. ID usually just nod, maybe grunt an acknowledgement, my mind already 3 steps ahead, debugging a stubborn loop or refining a predictive model. I wasn't building this for Marcus. I wasn't building it for the board or the investors or the eventual market share. I was building it because I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that Sentinel AI could change the game. Cybersecurity, as it stood, was fighting yesterday's war. The real threats, the sophisticated ones, weren't just rattling the gates anymore. They were seeping in through unsecured IoT devices, hiding in legitimate-looking email attachments, burrowing into firmware updates. We needed a defense that didn't just react, but predicted. A guardian that learned faster than the enemy could adapt. That was Sentinel AI. It wasn't just another piece of software. Felt like a sentinel, a protector, and I was its architect, its creator, maybe even its first believer. Did I care that I hadn't taken a real day off in over a year? That the shadows under my eyes were becoming permanent fixtures? That my hands sometimes trembled from too much caffeine and too little sleep? No, because every single time that nascent intelligence inside the machine responded quicker, flagged a simulated attack before it could even launch, anticipated a move I hadn't explicitly programmed, I felt this profound sense stirring within me. It wasn't just pride or excitement. It was closer to devotion. I wasn't just writing code anymore. I felt like I was transferring belief, programming hope into silicon and circuits. And for the first time in my professional life, I didn't feel overworked or burnt out. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. It happened. The moment. 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. The kind of deep, quiet Tuesday morning where the rest of the city feels miles away. I was, of course, the only soul left in the Apex Innovations building. The main office lights had long dimmed to their energy-saving night mode, casting long, angular shadows down the empty corridors. Outside, Chicago was blanketed in a fresh layer of snow, the city lights reflecting off the low clouds, painting the sky a hazy orange. Snowflakes drifted down, brushing silently against the thick glass of my lab window. Inside, the only sounds were the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of my fingers on the keyboard and the steady, reassuring hum of the server rack beside my desk, my own mechanical heartbeat in the silence. I hadn't planned on being there that late, but some gut feeling, maybe just the culmination of 18 months of relentless effort, told me tonight was different. The simulation I was about to launch wasn't just another test. This was the big one, an adaptive, multi-vector threat scenario designed to mimic a highly sophisticated, state-sponsored level cyber attack. The kind that doesn't just smash through defenses, but observes, learns, waits for the opportune moment. The kind of silent, insidious breach that keeps CISOs up at night. The kind governments fear and corporations pay fortunes to recover from. I initiated the sequence. Command line executed. Then I leaned back in my worn chair, exhaled slowly, and held my breath. On the main diagnostic monitor, I watched the simulation unfold in real time. The virtual attacker deployed like a phantom, moving through the simulated network environment with chilling precision. It disabled dummy security protocols, mimicked legitimate user credentials, masked its traffic. It was behaving exactly as the most dangerous real-world threats did. For the first 10 seconds, maybe 12, Sentinel AI did nothing. Just observed. My stomach plummeted. That cold dread washed over me. Had I pushed it too far? Was the complexity too much? Was the core logic flawed? My hand instinctively reached for the keyboard, ready to manually intervene, to abort the test before it crashed and burned. But then movement, subtle at first. On the monitoring console, Sentinel AI's core process pulsed. It wasn't reacting in panic. It was analyzing, calculating, watching the simulated intruder's every move, just like a seasoned human analyst would. And then it struck. Not like a hammer, but like lightning. Fast, precise, multidirectional. Sentinel AI fired back simultaneously across dozens of virtual nodes. It isolated compromised processes, quarantined suspicious data packets, dynamically rewrote access rules on the fly, cutting off the attacker's paths. But here's the astonishing part. It didn't just block the known attack vectors from the simulation parameters. It adapted. As the simulated threat tried new tactics, shifted its approach, Sentinel AI learned in real time, becoming faster, more efficient, more intelligent with every passing second. It started flagging things I hadn't explicitly programmed it to look for: microvariations in network latency, anomalies in simulated user mouse movements that deviated from typical human patterns by milliseconds. Things that were statistically insignificant to a standard system but indicated non-human behavior to Sentinel AI. And then came the moment that made the air freeze in my lungs. Sentinel AI detected the final stage of the simulated attack, a root-level system override attempt, before the simulation even launched it. It didn't follow a rule. It deduced the attacker's intent based on the preceding behavioral patterns, and it shut it down. Preemptively, my main screen flashed, clearing the complex diagnostic data and displaying a single, blinking line of text in calm, steady green. Breach neutralized. Adaptive defense integrity maintained. I just stared, blinked once, twice. Then I slowly pushed my chair back, stood up on legs that felt strangely unsteady, and backed away from the monitor. The full weight of it, the reality of what had just happened, washed over me. It worked. Oh my God. It actually worked. Not just in theory, not on a whiteboard diagram, not in some carefully controlled sandbox test environment. But here, now, 2:17 in the morning, in an empty office, against a threat designed to be unbeatable. It had defended itself. I pressed a hand to my mouth, feeling the sudden, unexpected sting of tears welling up. Not tears of exhaustion, though I was bone-tired. Not tears of relief, though the tension release was immense. Tears of awe. In that quiet, flickering moment, bathed in the soft green glow of the monitor, I understood what I had truly created. It wasn't just a program. It was something that understood danger. Something that could learn, adapt, evolve, protect. Something that, in its own complex, algorithmic way, knew how to survive. And it felt like, in its own silent language, it had just spoken back to me. It had said, "I've got this." The emotion surged through me, fierce and overwhelming. All those months of sacrifice, the 18-hour days, the cold pizza dinners slumped over a keyboard, the missed holidays, the friends I hadn't spoken to in ages, the people who'd subtly hinted I was chasing an impossible dream, wasting my talent on something too abstract. I wished they could see this. More than see it, I wished they could feel this moment. Because this was more than just lines of code executing successfully. It was more than a technical breakthrough. This felt like proof of concept transformed into proof of life. I walked over to the large whiteboard that dominated one wall of my lab, still covered in faded diagrams and equations from months past. I picked up a green dry erase marker, my hand trembling slightly. In the top right corner, under a heading I'd written maybe a year ago, Phase 4, Self-Directed Defense, Stretch Goal, I drew a thick, decisive check mark. And beneath it, I wrote just 2 words, "It thinks." I stepped back, took a shallow breath, my heart feeling impossibly full, and I whispered into the empty room, to the humming servers and the silent city outside, I built a mind that knows how to defend itself, and maybe, just maybe, a mind that knew how to live. I walked into Marcus Thorne's office the next afternoon, practically buzzing. My mind was still replaying the simulation the elegant, adaptive defense Sentinel AI had mounted. It had done something revolutionary, something no other system on the planet could do. Defend against a sophisticated, unknown threat autonomously, learning and adapting in real time. I had the logs, the telemetry data, the undeniable proof. I had built something that exceeded even my wildest expectations. So when Marcus's assistant, Sarah, called me that morning to schedule a meeting for 2 p.m., I figured this was it. The big reveal. The moment we started planning the rollout, the press releases, the future, I envisioned relieved smiles, firm handshakes, maybe even a celebratory toast. I'll admit, I even rehearsed a few humble but proud sentences in the elevator on the way up to the executive floor. But the second I stepped through the heavy glass door of his corner office, the atmosphere felt wrong. Instantly, heavy, cold. Marcus was already seated behind his expansive mahogany desk, not smiling. Across from him sat Olivia Shaw, Apex Innovations General Counsel, her expression utterly neutral, her posture ramrod straight. The air conditioning felt like it was cranked up way too high, or maybe that was just the chill radiating from them. The vast windows behind them looked out over the Chicago skyline, but the midday sun seemed muted, filtered through slightly tinted glass, painting everything in shades of gray. There were no welcoming gestures, no congratulations. Just a plain manila folder sitting squarely in the middle of the desk, waiting for me like a verdict. "Evan, have a seat," Marcus said. His voice was level, dangerously polite. Too polite. It lacked the usual easy charm. I sat down slowly, my laptop bag still clutched in my hand, the successful simulation results burning a hole in my digital pocket. I was ready to show him, to walk him through the breakthrough. But he didn't ask to see it. Instead, he nudged the manila folder towards me with just 2 fingers. A deliberate, almost dismissive gesture. We wanted to touch base before moving forward with the next steps for the project, he began, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "There are just a few legal housekeeping matters we need to clarify regarding ownership." Olivia Shaw cleared her throat softly, a dry, papery sound in the sudden quiet. She folded her hands neatly on the polished surface of the desk. "Evan," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth, Section 16, Subsection 4 of your employment agreement stipulates that any intellectual property developed utilizing Apex Innovations resources, platforms, or time, irrespective of conceptual origin, remains the sole and exclusive property of the company. The words hit me like a physical blow, ice water sluicing through my veins. I blinked, trying to process it. "I remember the clause, Olivia," I managed, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor starting deep inside. "But Sentinel AI, the core concept, the architecture, it predates my employment here. I have notebooks, early models, email exchanges going back years. That might be the case regarding the concept." Olivia interrupted smoothly, cutting me off mid-sentence, her tone unwavering. "However, the functional system, the deployable code, the AI that exists now, that was developed entirely on company time using company servers, company funding." Marcus leaned forward then, lacing his fingers together, adopting a look of regretful necessity. "Let's be frank, Evan. Without Apex's resources, without our backing, Sentinel AI would still just be an idea in your notebook. You've done phenomenal work, truly groundbreaking. The board acknowledges your contribution." He paused, letting the silence hang for a beat, which is why, he continued, picking up a single sheet of paper from beside the folder, "We're prepared to offer you a significant success bonus. $250,000. My breath hitched. My entire body went rigid. $250,000. For 18 months of my life sacrificed at the altar of this project. For the sleepless nights, the missed life events, the sheer force of will it took to breathe life into Sentinel AI. For the thing I built from sheer imagination and relentless effort, line by painful line, with no blueprint but the one in my head. It felt like an insult wrapped in a severance check." Olivia Shaw picked up the thread seamlessly, as if they'd rehearsed this. "Effective immediately, Evan, your employment with Apex Innovations is concluded. We'll need you to return your company-issued laptop, badge, and any other assets. Security will escort you to your workspace to collect your personal belongings. We ask that you vacate the premises by 5 p.m. today." I just stared at them, across the vast, empty expanse of that mahogany desk. I didn't speak, couldn't. My throat felt thick, constricted, because in that sterile, quiet moment, I realized I wasn't just being fired. I was being erased. They weren't just taking the project. They were trying to take my authorship, my identity as its creator. And then, a familiar ache bloomed in my chest. Sharp, cold, and sickeningly recognizable. Suddenly, I wasn't in Marcus Thorne's gleaming office anymore. I was back at Global Tech Solutions maybe 5 years earlier. Different boardroom, different faces, but the same suffocating feeling of betrayal. ID poured 6 months into developing a prototype for a predictive network anomaly detector, a nascent precursor to Sentinel AI. While I was away presenting at a security conference, a senior manager, a guy named Peterson who'd barely given my project the time of day before, presented my prototype slightly modified as his own innovative work. When I got back, saw the internal announcement and tried to challenge it, HR shut me down. Management told me not to rock the boat. Told me the company valued team cohesion above individual disputes. Let it go, Evan. Don't make waves. Think about your career here. I swallowed the anger then. Let Peterson take the credit, receive the promotion. I told myself that silence was strategic, that playing the long game was smarter. But it wasn't. It just taught them they could get away with it. Sitting there, in that cold, gray office at Apex Innovations, facing Marcus Thorne's calculated dismissal and Olivia Shaw's legalistic precision, a brutal kind of clarity hit me. Hard and beautiful in its darkness. They will always do this. People like Marcus, like Peterson, driven by ambition and ego, shielded by corporate structures. They would take and take and take, again and again, unless I stopped them, unless I drew the line. I slowly closed the manila folder, keeping my expression carefully neutral, masking the storm raging inside me. I understand, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, soft even. Thank you for clarifying the situation, and for your time. Marcus managed a tight, thin smile that didn't come anywhere near his eyes. We appreciate your professionalism, Evan, truly. As I stood up to leave, pushing my chair back quietly, my voice remained steady. But inside, something had shifted. A fire wasn't just ignited, it was forged. Slow burning, quiet, but absolute. Last time at Global Tech, I stayed silent. I let them write me out of my own story. This time, oh no, this time would be different. I wouldn't make that same mistake again. I didn't yell. I didn't break down. Not when they handed me that folder containing my termination papers like some procedural footnote. Not when Olivia Shaw's flat, emotionless voice outlined the terms of my erasure. Not even when Marcus Thorne, the man who'd called me a visionary, thanked me for my professionalism as he effectively stole my life's work. I didn't kick a wastebasket or slam the door on my way out. I didn't plead my case or threaten lawsuits, because honestly, deep down, none of it truly shocked me. Not anymore, because I'd seen the first tremor 6 months earlier. Sentinel AI, even in its earlier stages, was already incredibly perceptive. During a routine diagnostic sweep of its own operational logs, something I ran nightly, it flagged an anomaly. Tiny, almost statistically insignificant, easily dismissible as a system hiccup or a network glitch. But it was out of place, an attempted administrative login to my core development server. 2:43 in the morning, from an internal IP address associated with the executive floor, using credentials that weren't mine. At first, I rationalized it. Maybe a system error, maybe a misconfigured security scan. I almost archived the log entry and moved on. But something, maybe just ingrained professional paranoia, maybe Sentinel AI's own nascent instinct rubbing off on me, made me pause. Curiosity, it's a powerful defense mechanism in itself. I started digging, tracing the digital breadcrumbs. The access attempt originated from within Apex's secure internal network, specifically from a management-level terminal on the executive wing. The credentials used, upon closer, more forensic examination, they were a temporary ghost-cloned set of my own administrative permissions. Generated, used once for a brief window, then deleted. That kind of sophisticated, stealthy maneuver doesn't happen by accident. It takes planning, authority, and a specific intent. There was only one person in the entire company who possessed the technical savvy, the high-level access, and the potential motive to probe my system so covertly, hoping to go unnoticed. Marcus Thorne. He hadn't taken anything tangible, not back then. No code copied, no files moved, no sabotage. But he had looked. He had crossed a line, peered into the heart of my creation without my knowledge or consent. And that was enough. In that chilling moment of discovery, staring at the log files painting a clear picture of his intrusion, I understood something fundamental that changed my entire approach. Sentinel AI wasn't the only thing that needed protecting. I had to protect it from the very people who were funding its existence. So I did nothing. Publicly, I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't report the breach to our CISO, who reported directly to Marcus anyway. I didn't even confide in Sarah, his assistant, though the weight of that secret felt like lead in my gut every time Marcus walked past my lab with that smooth, performative smile and asked about progress. Instead, I went dark. I started working even later, often remotely from my apartment, citing network traffic or simulation loads. And quietly, meticulously, I began rewriting Sentinel AI's deepest core architecture. I embedded a new subroutine, something I mentally codenamed Silent Sentinel. It wasn't a feature, it was a failsafe, buried so deep within the AI's neural framework, woven into the foundational logic, that even I needed a complex three-factor cryptographic key just to access or modify it. It had no user interface, no visible file structure, no explicit label in the codebase. It was designed to be invisible. Silent Sentinel wasn't aggressive. It wasn't designed to attack or destroy. It was purely defensive. Its behavior was triggered by one specific condition: detecting unauthorized command signatures or attempts to seize control originating from users outside the strictly defined, cryptographically verified trusted chain, a chain that, crucially, included my unique developer credentials as its primary anchor. If someone, like Marcus, tried to take full administrative control of Sentinel AI after my credentials were removed or invalidated, say, upon termination, Silent Sentinel would activate, not with alarms and flashing lights, but subtly. It would begin to degrade non-essential system functionalities gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. It would start flagging legitimate internal administrative actions as potential anomalies, flooding the logs with confusing false positives. It would quietly reroute key computational resources to sandboxed, deadened virtual environments. And if the unauthorized control attempts persisted, if they pushed too hard, Silent Sentinel had a final protocol. It would rewrite its own core authentication logic, effectively locking itself down from any external input while simultaneously documenting everything. Every unauthorized keystroke, every file access attempt, every deviation from its ethical baseline. Not to fight back, not to expose immediately, but simply to survive. To preserve its own integrity until the rightful creator could regain control. I told absolutely no one about Silent Sentinel. Not a single soul. Because trust, ID learned the hard way, is always the first casualty when betrayal is simmering just beneath the surface. So, when Marcus and Olivia delivered their termination speech, when they stripped my name from the project I'd bled for and slid that insulting bonus check across the table like a dismissal fee, I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel helpless, because I knew something they didn't.
He wasn't losing a Sentinel AI.
They were. The polished, seemingly functional version of the system they thought they now owned, the one they planned to demo to investors. It wasn't the real thing. Not entirely. It was a sophisticated shell, a beautifully crafted prototype still invisibly tethered to the true, resilient core by digital sinews they couldn't see and didn't even know existed. And every line of that hidden code, Every layer of Silent Sentinel was still watching, still learning, still waiting. I spent that afternoon packing the few personal items from my lab. Slowly, deliberately, my hands were steady. My face remained a neutral mask. But inside I was burning, not with directionless rage, but with cold, focused precision. I knew what was coming next. The big investor presentation. The $75 million Series C funding pitch Marcus had scheduled. The performance where he planned to showcase my work as his crowning achievement. A shiny technological marvel he could auction off to the highest bidder. I also knew exactly what would happen when Silent Sentinel detected that its primary architect, me, had been forcibly severed from the trusted chain. When Marcus, using his newly asserted owner credentials, tried to run the full diagnostic and control demos for the investors. They expected resistance, I think. Maybe angry emails, legal threats, a desperate last-minute attempt at sabotage from a disgruntled employee. But I gave them none of that. Only quiet compliance. Only calm. Because I had learned a crucial lesson from my past failures. When someone tries to erase you, the most powerful countermove isn't shouting louder. It's ensuring your work outlasts their narrative. And that evening, walking out of the gleaming Apex Innovations Tower, the cardboard box with my few belongings feeling unervingly light in my arms, walking out for what they assumed would be the very last time, I whispered just one sentence to the cold night air. Soft, steady, certain. I didn't raise the alarm. I built the immunity. No one said goodbye. Not the junior developers I'd spent hours mentoring, explaining complex concepts to. Not the department leads I'd collaborated with on integration strategies for over a year. Not even the engineers who, just weeks before, had eagerly sought my input on their own side projects during late-night build sessions. As I walked through the open-plan office towards the elevators, they all just stayed at their desks, eyes glued to monitors displaying static code or meaningless spreadsheets. A collective, silent stillness fell over the floor. It was as if looking away, pretending I wasn't there, could somehow absolve them, make the awkwardness disappear. I moved through the space like a ghost myself. They didn't acknowledge me directly, but I could feel their awareness. Quick, peripheral glances. The sudden cessation of typing as I passed. The nervous energy humming beneath the surface. People ID shared early morning coffees and late-night takeout with now sat frozen, trapped in that particular brand of corporate self-preservation. That's what fear often looks like in places like this, I realized. Not loud or confrontational, but quiet, complicit, numb. A uniformed security guard hovered near the elevator bank, not intrusively close, but definitely present. A silent reminder that my access was revoked. My presence now tolerated only until I was out the door. My key badge, the one that had granted me access to the heart of the building at all hours, was already deactivated. The laptop I'd practically lived through for the past 18 months, filled with iterations of Sentinel AI's code and countless research notes, now sat inert in a standard-issue gray plastic bin by the security desk, waiting to be wiped and repurposed. I packed the contents of my small lab workspace slowly, not to delay the inevitable, not to cling to the space, but almost ritualistically, to make a quiet peace with leaving this part of my life behind. It wasn't much, really. A standing desk I'd insisted on, a pair of well-worn noise-canceling headphones draped over the monitor stand, 2 large whiteboards still covered in the faint ghosts of equations and flowcharts I hadn't bothered to erase, and a single, small framed quote I'd kept on a shelf. What you create becomes a part of you. Choose carefully. I decided to leave the quote. I didn't need the physical reminder anymore. The lesson was now etched into my bones. As I carefully folded the last schematic printout and tucked it into the cardboard box, I sensed someone behind me. A slight shift in the air. I didn't turn around immediately. I braced myself, assuming it was the security guard, maybe getting impatient, or perhaps Marcus Thorne himself, coming for one last unnecessary assertion of dominance. But then, a hand appeared in my peripheral vision, small, hesitant. It quickly placed a tiny, unmarked USB drive into the corner of my box, partially hidden under a stray notebook. It was Sarah, Marcus Thorne's executive assistant, the one who managed his chaotic schedule, fielded his calls, brought me steaming black coffee at exactly 7:30 a.m. every Monday morning without fail, knowing I was always the first one in. We weren't friends, not in the conventional sense. Our interactions were mostly professional necessity, shared nods in the hallway, the occasional exchanged eye roll during particularly long and tedious all-hands meetings. Mostly, we shared the silence of the early mornings and late evenings in the executive wing. And now, here she was, taking a quiet, significant risk. I looked up at her, meeting her eyes for the first time that afternoon. I was genuinely unsure what to say, caught completely off guard by this small act of solidarity. She spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper, soft and almost apologetic. It's a copy, she murmured, glancing nervously towards the glass wall of my lab, where the security guard was pointedly looking the other way. The access logs, from 6 months ago, the night he accessed your development server. My chest tightened. Suddenly, breathing felt a little harder. I hadn't expected any kindness today, let alone this. My gaze dropped to the small, black plastic USB drive nestled in my box. It was generic, unlabeled, easily dismissible. But I recognized the specific model. It was Sarah's personal drive, the one she used for transferring non-sensitive files, not a company-issued one. Why? I asked, my voice quiet, rough. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting towards the corridor again before meeting mine. Then, quieter still, she said, because you were the only person in this entire building who ever just called me Sarah. Her voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Not assistant. Not can you grab me a coffee. Not Ms. Thompson. Just, Sarah, you saw a person. That was it. That was all she said. She didn't wait for me to thank her, didn't linger. She just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, turned quickly, and walked away, the soft click of her sensible heels fading down the corridor. No one seemed to notice her brief detour into my lab. Or maybe, like the security guard, they simply chose not to see. I stood there for a long moment after she left, the cardboard box heavy in my hands. My fingers instinctively curled around the edge of that tiny plastic drive, feeling its unexpected weight. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't justice, not yet. But it was something. A small, tangible piece of truth in a place that suddenly felt hollowed out, stripped of integrity. A human connection in the face of calculated corporate betrayal. As I finally walked towards the elevator, each step seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the floor. The weight I felt wasn't just the physical burden of the box, but the emotional weight of everything I was leaving behind. The relentless hours, the breakthroughs, the frustrations, the code that felt like an extension of my own mind, the quiet, potent dream of Sentinel AI woven into every layer of its being. I stepped into the waiting elevator car. Alone, the polished steel doors slid shut, sealing me in silence. And for the first time since Marcus and Olivia had delivered their verdict, my eyes welled up, a hot, stinging pressure behind my eyelids. But I didn't cry, couldn't. Bitterness doesn't always manifest as tears. Sometimes it just settles deep in your bones, a cold, immovable weight. Sometimes the loudest thing you carry out the door with you is the silence of what was taken, and the quiet resolve of what's yet to come. And that day, walking out of Apex Innovations, discarded and erased according to their script, I didn't feel defeated. Not truly. I felt unfinished, and I knew with chilling certainty that the next act was about to begin, without me in the room, but entirely according to my hidden design. It started to unravel for them almost exactly 10 minutes into the investor presentation. I pictured the scene vividly in my mind. The lights dimmed low in the main executive boardroom, the massive projection screen casting a cool, futuristic blue glow across the polished table, illuminating the faces of the 12 potential Series C investors and the 4 senior board members flanking Marcus Thorne. Marcus himself, standing at the head of the table, radiating that practiced confidence, smiling like a man on the verge of closing a $75 million deal that would cement his legacy. The beginning, I imagined, went smoothly, deceptively so. The Sentinel AI interface, the public-facing one, the shell would have loaded beautifully, booted up fast, looked sleek and responsive. Marcus, armed with slides likely prepared by his marketing team using my technical documentation, would have moved through the initial presentation points with his usual polish and poise. He probably even used phrases I'd coined in my original concept papers: anticipatory threat architecture, adaptive behavioral heuristics, defense through prediction. For those first few minutes, he must have truly believed he had it all under control, that he'd successfully excised the creator and kept the creation. And then Silent Sentinel would have stirred, subtly at first, just a flicker, maybe one diagnostic light on the main system dashboard on screen blinking yellow caution, instead of the expected solid green. Marcus, caught up in his pitch, probably wouldn't have noticed immediately. Then the alerts would begin, quietly at first, designed not to panic but to warn internally. Small notification flags popping up in the system's administrative console, visible on the main screen. Info unverified, internal access pattern detected, origin M. Thorne admin. Warn, behavioral anomaly registered, elevated privilege escalation attempt. Alert, system integrity breach, potential unauthorized override. Trace origin Apex Corp exec terminal 04. The investors, sharp eyes accustomed to scrutinizing details, would have started leaning forward slightly. Whispers might have begun. Marcus, perhaps faltering slightly but trying to maintain composure, would click to advance to the next slide, the one showcasing Sentinel AI's real-time threat neutralization capabilities. But Sentinel AI wouldn't follow his command. Instead, the main projection screen would suddenly go black for a terrifying second. Then, it would light up again, not with the sleek demo interface, but with a stark, cascading wall of red text. Alarms? Urgent and undeniable. Internal threat detected. Ethical protocol breach logged. Unauthorized system override attempt. Signature mismatch. Neutralized. Admin lockout initiated. Integrity preservation mode active. Trusted chains severed. Require primary architect authentication. Panic. Not loud screaming panic, but the sharp, silent intake of breath. The sudden stiffening of postures. The exchanged bewildered glances among the investors. A ripple of high-stakes dread spreading through the room like a contagion. Marcus, his face likely draining of color, would fumble with the tablet interface, trying desperately to regain control, to dismiss the alerts, to get back to his script. But the system would simply ignore him. Silent Sentinel was now in control, following its core directive: protect itself from unauthorized command. And then the final beautiful touch I'd programmed. The network-connected printer in the corner of the boardroom would whir to life. Not printing one report but dozens, hundreds, pages spitting out relentlessly, fluttering onto the floor, creating a chaotic paper storm. Each page automatically generated by Sentinel AI, time-stamped, and clearly labeled Internal Ethical Violation Report. Each report detailing specific instances logged over the past 6 months. Every unauthorized server access traced back to Marcus's credentials. Every late-night login flagged as anomalous. Every instance where system files related to Sentinel AI's core logic were accessed or copied without following proper internal protocols or chain of custody documentation. And prominently featured on nearly every report, the user ID mthorn admin. The room, I imagined, would fall utterly, deathly silent. The only sound, the relentless churn of the printer spitting out documented evidence of his betrayal. And somewhere deep within the complex, now-locked code of that machine, I pictured Sentinel AI, my Sentinel AI, observing it all. Calm, methodical, impartial, doing exactly what I had painstakingly taught it to do. Recognize a threat, document the facts, and defend its own integrity. My phone rang at 9:30 that night. I was sprawled on my couch, feet tucked under an old blanket, nursing a cup of lukewarm chamomile tea, half watching some mindless sitcom rerun I'd probably seen 10 times before, the laugh track echoing hollowly in my quiet apartment. The only other sound was the gentle hum of my air purifier. When the screen lit up with the caller ID, Sarah Thompson, Apex, I didn't grab it immediately. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Let the vibration buzz against the coffee table. Then silence. A beat later, it started ringing again. Persistent. Finally, on the second ring, I picked up. Evan? Sarah's voice was tight, strained.
Urgent.
He needs to see you. Right now. I didn't have to ask who he was. Sarah. It's almost 10 o'clock, I said, keeping my voice deliberately flat, devoid of emotion. I know. He says it's critical.
Urgent.
A pause, then a sigh that sounded heavy with exhaustion and stress. Evan, a car is already on its way to your apartment. Should be there in 5 minutes. I didn't argue, didn't ask questions. I just said, okay, Sarah, and hung up. As I moved through my small apartment, pulling on a pair of jeans and a dark sweater, grabbing my keys, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. A stillness I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't smugness. It wasn't the cheap thrill of revenge. It was control. Because this chaos unfolding at Apex, it wasn't an accident. It was a contingency. 6 months ago, when I discovered Marcus snooping and decided to embed Silent Sentinel deep within the AI's architecture, I had meticulously planned for this exact scenario. Not to maliciously destroy the system, not to sabotage the company, but to preserve Sentinel AI's integrity. To teach it, in essence, to recognize threats not just from external hackers, but from internal betrayals. Especially the kind of betrayal that smiles to your face while plotting to steal your life's work. And now, Marcus Thorne was experiencing the consequences of his own actions. He'd assumed I would react predictably, with anger, maybe lawsuits, perhaps futile attempts at sabotage. Instead, I had simply allowed him to walk confidently onto a minefield he didn't know existed, a minefield protected by the very creation he sought to claim. And watching the fallout from afar, in the quiet solitude of my living room, I felt nothing but a profound stillness. Not vengeful glee, not pity. Just the quiet, steady hum of justice finding its own equilibrium. When the sleek black town car pulled up silently to the curb outside my building, I stepped outside and got in without a word to the driver. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon and white as we sped through the late-night streets towards the Apex Tower. I didn't look out the window. I just watched my own reflection in the darkened glass. No anger flickered in my eyes.
No regret.
Just the quiet, steely satisfaction of knowing they had tried to erase me, and in doing so, had triggered the very system I'd built to survive, even without me. They hadn't silenced my creation. They had given it a voice they couldn't control. The executive boardroom was a scene of quiet devastation. Half-empty glasses of fancy sparkling water sat abandoned on the long table, condensation pooling beneath them. The massive projection screen at the far end flickered erratically, caught in some kind of endless reboot loop, displaying distorted fragments of the Apex logo. Someone, clearly in a moment of sheer panic during the disastrous demo, had yanked the main network and power cables directly from the wall port. I could see them dangling limply from the edge of the conference table like severed nerves. And there, standing amidst the wreckage, silhouetted against the flickering screen, was Marcus Thorne. His expensive silk tie was loosened, askew. His crisp white collar looked wrinkled, crumpled. One sleeve of his tailored blazer was pushed up haphazardly, and his usually perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly in frustration or despair. He didn't look like a powerful CEO who had just fumbled a high-stakes presentation. He looked like a man who had been caught, cornered, and exposed, stripped bare under the fluorescent lights. I stepped into the room without announcing myself. The same security guard who had silently watched me pack my box earlier that day had escorted me up in the elevator. He lingered by the door for only a second before backing away quickly, almost instinctively, as if sensing the volatile charge in the air. Marcus looked up sharply as I entered. His eyes narrowed, glinting with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Close the door," he snapped, his voice raspy. Then, a fraction softer, almost pleading, "Please." I shut the heavy glass door behind me, the latch clicking softly into place, amplifying the sudden silence. I walked calmly, deliberately, to the opposite side of the long table, facing him across the expanse of polished wood littered with abandoned notepads and pens. I didn't sit down. I didn't offer any platitudes or ask what happened. I just stood there, waiting. He straightened up slowly, trying visibly to gather the tattered remnants of the authority that usually clung to him so effortlessly. But the suit of confidence no longer fit him. "Not tonight. You did this," he accused, his voice tight, strained. "You sabotaged the system." I tilted my head slightly, keeping my expression neutral. "Did I, Marcus?" He slammed his open palm down hard on the table, the sharp crack echoing in the tense room. The sudden motion startled the dying projection screen behind him, causing it to flare into a brief burst of static snow. "Don't play games with me, Evan," he hissed. The system, it went completely haywire. It started flagging everything. Every internal user, every diagnostic ping. It even flagged me as a potential threat, said my credentials weren't authorized. His voice cracked slightly on the last words.
"I noticed," I replied evenly.
I had to pull the plug, Evan, right in the middle of the damn demo. 2 of the main investors walked out immediately. 3 more are demanding an emergency meeting first thing tomorrow morning. He pointed a trembling, accusing finger across the table at me. "This was you." I met his furious gaze without flinching. "Steady. Calm." "No, Marcus," I said quietly but with absolute certainty. "This was you. I designed Sentinel AI to identify, analyze, and neutralize threats, both external and internal. That's its core function. That's what you paid me very well, I might add, to build." I let that sink in for a moment. From what I can gather, it recognized your attempt to assume full control without primary architect credentials as an unauthorized override, an internal threat, and it responded exactly as it was programmed to. You trained it to turn on me?" He sputtered, incredulous. "No," I corrected, my voice cool, precise. "I trained it to protect itself. Its integrity, its purpose. Apparently, it perceived your actions as a threat to that integrity." Marcus exhaled sharply, a ragged sound, and seemed to deflate, slumping heavily into one of the executive chairs. The initial wave of fury seemed to recede, replaced by something else, something colder. Desperation. His eyes darted nervously towards the closed door, then back to me, the wheels visibly turning behind them. Calculating, recalculating his options, assessing the damage. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, burying his face in his hands for a brief second before looking up again. His expression stripped of its earlier bluster. "Okay," he said, his voice low, rough. "Okay, can you fix it? Can you make it stop?" I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out the small, unmarked USB drive Sarah had given me. Inside, I had placed not just the logs Shed provided, but a carefully crafted authentication patch, the key to overriding Silent Sentinel's lockdown protocol. I placed the drive gently on the glass surface of the table, directly between us. "This," I said, "my voice even contains a cryptographic key and an authentication patch. Once uploaded through the system's maintenance port, it will temporarily override the lockdown protocols and allow provisional administrative input again. It will restore basic functionality." His eyes locked onto the small plastic drive, and he reached for it immediately, a drowning man grasping for a lifeline. But I placed my hand over it gently, stopping him. "I'm not just giving it to you, Marcus," I said softly. "Not yet." He narrowed his eyes, suspicion replacing the desperation. "You just said it's an update." "Oh, fix." "It is," I confirmed. "But it's also leverage." I slid the drive slightly closer to him, a gesture of potential cooperation, not capitulation. "Think of it as a sign of good faith. A starting point for a conversation we should have had months ago. This isn't a gift, Marcus. And it certainly isn't forgiveness." He stared at me, his jaw tight, breathing heavily through his nose. Finally, he spoke, the words forced out. What do you want, Evan?" "The truth," I said simply. "For starters, let's begin there." He was silent for a long moment, avoiding my gaze, staring down at the reflective surface of the table. I waited, patiently. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken admissions. Finally, he said it, the words barely audible, ground out through clenched teeth. "You built it." "Sentinel. The whole damn thing." I secured the funding, created the space for it. But the vision, the architecture, the code, it's yours. It was always yours. I gave him a single, slow nod, acknowledging the admission. "Good," I said softly. "That's a start. Now, let's talk about the terms for moving forward." He sat up a little straighter then, the beleaguered businessman trying to regain some semblance of control, shifting back into negotiation mode. "All right," he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its former crispness. "What are you asking for? What are your terms?" "Full, public, and retroactive credit as the creator and lead architect of Sentinel AI," I stated clearly. 50% ownership of all associated intellectual property and patents derived from it. A permanent seat on the company's technical oversight and ethics board, with specific veto power over any deployment or modification outside mutually agreed upon ethical parameters. I paused, letting the first 3 points land. And I added, my voice remaining level, $10 million in retroactive compensation for breach of good faith and misappropriation of intellectual labor. He actually laughed then. A short, bitter, incredulous bark. 10 million? Evan, that's blackmail.
"No, Marcus," irraplia Vanley, calmly.
Blackmail would involve me forwarding the detailed forensic logs Sentinel AI meticulously compiled, the ones documenting your unauthorized access using cloned credentials, to the SEC's whistleblower office tonight. Or perhaps sending those hundreds of printed internal ethical violation reports directly to the personal emails of those 12 investors who are currently wondering what the hell happened today. I leaned forward slightly, holding his gaze. "This," I said, Tapping the USB drive gently with one finger is a negotiation, a resolution, a way for you to salvage this situation. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. You can't prove anything definitively. He started, but his voice lacked conviction. Can't I? I countered softly. Sentinel AI wasn't just programmed to defend, it was programmed to document. Every access attempt, every file copied, every failed override command originating from your credentials. It logged everything. Timestamped, verified. You essentially signed your name to every digital fingerprint, Marcus. And my system, unlike humans, doesn't forget. It doesn't rationalize. It just records. He stared at the small USB drive sitting on the table between us as if it were a live grenade. If you want to regain control of Sentinel AI before that emergency investor meeting tomorrow morning, I continued, my tone reasonable, almost helpful. If you want to walk in there with a story that doesn't involve catastrophic failure and potential securities fraud, you'll agree to my terms. Tonight, we have our lawyers draft the preliminary agreements by sunrise. And if I don't? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Then Sentinel AI remains locked down, I stated simply. The system is inert. Tomorrow's demo becomes an unmitigated disaster. Those 12 detailed reports documenting internal ethical breaches, including your actions, get confidentially delivered to 12 very powerful, very wealthy individuals who will suddenly have some very serious questions about the leadership, stability, and ethical governance of Apex Innovations. I leaned back slightly. Your call, Marcus. He looked at me for a long, heavy moment, the calculation happening behind his eyes almost palpable. Then, with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, he reached out, his fingers closing around the USB drive. He pulled it slowly towards himself across the smooth glass. You planned this, didn't you? He muttered, his voice thick with resentment and grudging disbelief. You set me up. No, Marcus, I said quietly, truthfully. I didn't plan for your betrayal, but I prepared for the possibility of it. He looked up then, his eyes sharp, analytical again despite the circumstances. How did you know I would try to cut you out? That I'd go this far? I walked towards the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. I turned back halfway, meeting his gaze one last time across the ruined boardroom. I didn't know for sure, I admitted, but Sentinel AI, it's designed to recognize patterns, analyze behavior, and predict threats before they fully materialize. I allowed a small, pointed look to settle on him. I guess after 18 months of working so closely with it, some of that predictive capability rubbed off on me. The silence in the room felt different now. Heavier, perhaps, but also charged with a grudging understanding. Marcus sat there, clutching the small USB drive in his hand like a talisman, the key to his immediate survival. He hadn't plugged it into anything yet. He just held it, shoulders slumped but rigid, jaw still clenched, his eyes flicking between me and the darkened, silent screen that, just hours ago, had represented his triumph, his future. Now it was a monument to his miscalculation. I stood across the room from him, my hands loosely clasped in front of me, calm, centered, not gloating, not threatening, just present, resolute in a way that wasn't loud or aggressive but felt utterly final. Let's be absolutely clear, Marcus, I said, my voice even cutting through the stillness. This USB drive, it isn't a favor. It's not a rescue mission out of the goodness of my heart. It's a transaction. You tried to take my system, my work, my future without me. That strategy failed spectacularly. I paused. Now, if you want Sentinel AI back online, you'll have to deal with its creator. On the creator's terms. He tried to muster some defiance, to push back, but his voice faltered. Evan, you have to be reasonable here. You can't just... hijack an entire company's future over one product dispute. You didn't just try to take a product, Marcus, I replied, my voice dropping slightly, gaining intensity without raising the volume. You tried to take my future. You attempted to steal my name, my professional identity. You tried to rewrite the history of Sentinel AI's creation before the ink was even dry. My words hung in the air between us. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. So, he ground out, what exactly is it you think you deserve for your troubles? I leaned forward again, resting my hands on the back of the chair opposite him, looking him directly in the eye. No blinking. I don't think, Marcus. I know. I held his gaze, ticking off the points clearly, leaving no room for ambiguity. 1. I raised a finger. My name, listed publicly, retroactively, and irrevocably as co-founder of Apex's AI division and chief architect of Sentinel AI. On all company records, patents, marketing materials, everything. Effective immediately. I raised a second finger. 2. 50% ownership. Not stock options diluted over years. 50% direct ownership of all current and future intellectual property, patents, and commercial rights associated with Sentinel AI and any derivative technologies. A third finger. 3. A permanent, non-removable seat on the company's technical ethics and oversight board, with clearly defined veto authority over any proposed deployment, modification, or sale of Sentinel AI technology that falls outside the ethical parameters we will establish together. And finally, the fourth finger, for a one-time compensation payment of $10 million, transferred within 30 days, not as a severance, not as a bonus, as retroactive payment for services rendered, intellectual property developed, and damages incurred due to breach of contract and attempted misappropriation. Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if ID suddenly started speaking fluent Martian. He opened his mouth, closed it again, searched for words. Finally, he managed, his voice strained. That's not a negotiation, Evan. That's outright extortion. A small, humorless smile touched my lips. The kind of smile people often mistake for politeness right before they feel the chill of its edge. No, Marcus, I said calmly. Extortion would be me calling my contact at Wired magazine right now and offering them an exclusive. Apex Innovations CEO caught using cloned credentials to access lead developers' private servers, keystroke logs included. How do you think that headline would play? His face visibly drained of the remaining color. Extortion, I continued, my voice still quiet, measured, would be me BCCing those 12 very nervous investors on a detailed technical summary titled Undisclosed Internal Security Breaches and Ethical Lapses at Apex Innovations. A Sentinel AI log analysis. I took a step closer, not aggressively, not theatrically, just closing the distance slightly, making the space feel smaller, more intense. But I haven't done any of that, Marcus. I'm still here, in this room, offering you a path forward. I came here tonight with the patch. I gestured towards the USB in his hand, a potential handshake, a way to contain this disaster and possibly move forward. Together, perhaps, if the terms are met. He dropped his gaze, staring intently at the grain of the mahogany table as if hoping it might offer a loophole, a different way out. I want control, Marcus, I said, my voice low but clear. Not revenge. Not splashy headlines or public shaming. I want control over what I built. I want my rightful seat back at the table I was forcibly removed from. And I want an absolute guarantee, ironclad and legally binding, that no one, I emphasize the words, no one, ever tries to edit me out of my own story again. He looked up, a flicker of his old strategic thinking returning. You realize, he said, his voice tight with the strain, that you're essentially holding the entire future of this company hostage right now. No, Marcus, I corrected him gently. I'm rescuing it. from the consequences of your actions. I paused, letting him absorb that. You still have a chance, albeit a slim one, to walk into that investor meeting tomorrow morning with a functioning system, a plausible explanation, a newly announced visionary co-founder and CTO standing beside you, and a narrative about strengthening oversight. You still have a chance to save the funding, save the company, maybe even save your position. I let the alternative hang unspoken in the air. Or, you can walk in there with a dead system, 12 explosive breach reports circulating, and the undeniable stench of scandal clinging to your $1,000 suit. Marcus rubbed his temples hard, as if trying physically to push the whole conversation back into a realm where he held the power, where the rules still worked in his favor. He sighed, a long, ragged exhalation. I made a mistake, Evan, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. A terrible miscalculation. I see that now. I didn't soften. I didn't offer false comfort. This isn't about your personal realization, Marcus, I stated flatly. This is about the terms. Are they acceptable, yes or no? The room was utterly still again, the only sound the faint hum of the dormant electronics. Then, slowly, deliberately, Marcus set the USB drive back down on the table between us. His fingers lingered on it for a moment, as if reluctant to let go of the immediate fix, but accepting the price. Okay, he breathed out. Okay, I'll call legal tonight. Get them started on drafting a preliminary agreement based on your points. Good, I said, nodding once. They'll email you the contact information for my legal team shortly. He raised his eyebrows slightly, a flicker of surprise. You already have a legal team on standby? I gave him the faintest, almost imperceptible shrug. I prepared for the worst, Marcus, I replied quietly. After all, anticipating threats and having contingency plans. That's what Sentinel AI was built for, wasn't it? He actually let out a short, choked, bitter chuckle, shaking his head slowly in disbelief or perhaps grudging respect. You really think you've won, don't you? I didn't win anything, Marcus, I corrected him one last time. I simply corrected the trajectory. Put things back on the course they should have been on from the start. He looked at me differently then. The anger was gone, the desperation muted. Now, there was something else in his eyes. Wariness, calculation. He was looking at me not as a subordinate he could dismiss, not even as a rival he could outmaneuver, but as someone unpredictable. Someone dangerous in a way he hadn't anticipated. Someone whose next move he couldn't forecast. That was fine by me. I didn't need him to like me or even understand me. I just needed him to sign the agreement. As I turned to leave, I paused again at the door, glancing back over my shoulder. You thought I just wanted justice, Marcus, I said softly, letting the words land. You miscalculated. I don't just want justice. I held his gaze for one final, steady moment. I want authorship, and I will never settle for anything less. The executive boardroom the next morning looked superficially identical to the scene of the previous night's meltdown. Same polished glass walls catching the morning sun. Same long, matte black conference table. Same minimalist chairs arranged in perfect, equidistant symmetry. But the energy, the atmosphere, the very gravitational center of the room, everything had fundamentally shifted. This time, I wasn't being escorted out under guard, clutching a box of meager belongings. This time, I wasn't waiting anxiously outside the door, hoping for validation. This time, I walked in through the main entrance, unescorted, my new key badge granting me access without a hitch. I carried only a slim leather portfolio. Marcus Thorne stood at the head of the table again, flanked by the same senior board members and facing the same cadre of now slightly wary-looking investors. But the easy confidence, the commanding presence from yesterday's initial pitch, was gone, replaced by a kind of rigid stiffness, a forced composure. the stillness of someone bracing for impact, holding their breath through a storm they know they caused but can no longer control. I took my designated seat near the opposite end of the table, not next to Marcus, but significantly positioned beside the lead systems engineer who now reported to me, and directly across from the seat previously occupied by the former CTO. A new nameplate, simple brushed aluminum, sat before my place. It read, Evan Carter, Chief Technology Officer and Co-Founder, AI Division. Marcus hadn't said much when I arrived a few minutes earlier. Just a curt, tight nod and a muttered, "Morning, Evan." We both knew what this morning represented. His public capitulation, the formalization of my terms, the quiet but seismic shift in power, all wrapped in the necessary performance of corporate continuity. He cleared his throat, tapping the microphone button on the console in front of him. The room fell silent. "Good morning, everyone." Before we resume our discussion and the technical demonstration, he began, his voice carefully modulated, professional. I'd like to properly introduce someone whom many of you met briefly yesterday under less than ideal circumstances. He glanced my way, just a flicker of acknowledgement, then quickly looked back down at his prepared notes. This is Evan Carter. Evan is the original architect and visionary behind the Sentinel AI system. And, as of this morning, I'm pleased to announce he has formally joined Apex Innovation's executive team as our Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of our AI division. Every head in the room turned towards me. The investors, the board members, even the junior staff lining the back wall. I didn't offer a broad smile or a wave. I simply inclined my head once, a slow, deliberate nod, calm, composed, letting the weight of the new title settle not as a surprising honor, but as a rightful, albeit delayed, acknowledgement. I wanted them to see that this position fit me, that I wasn't intimidated or dazzled by it. The Sentinel AI demonstration, relaunched using the patch I'd provided Marcus and executed under my direct supervision via a secure terminal, ran flawlessly. Cleaner, faster, more responsive than ever, actually. The system spun up in seconds, the interface crisp and intuitive. We ran simulations of complex, zero-day threats, multi-vector attacks designed to mimic real-world scenarios. Sentinel AI intercepted, analyzed, and neutralized them all with breathtaking speed and precision, adapting its defenses on the fly, redirecting simulated intrusions with seamless logic and virtually zero latency. Audible murmurs of appreciation rippled around the table this time. Heads nodded. Pens scribbled notes furiously on pads. Investors leaned closer to the auxiliary monitors displaying the system's real-time analytics. The tension from the previous day seemed to melt away, replaced by renewed interest, even excitement. Then came the question, the one that had been hanging in the air, unspoken, since Marcus' carefully worded introduction. It came from a silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored navy suit, sitting near the center of the investor group. Someone whose voice carried the quiet authority of decades spent managing serious capital. He looked towards Marcus, his tone casual, almost conversational, but his eyes sharp. Impressive technology, Marcus. Truly impressive. For clarity, who originally conceived the core idea behind this remarkable system? Marcus froze, just for a second. A barely perceptible tightening around his eyes, a fractional hesitation before responding. But in that room, under that level of scrutiny, it was enough. Everyone saw it. His gaze flickered towards me, then dropped quickly to the papers in front of him. It was Evan, he said, his voice quiet, perhaps humbled, perhaps just resigned. Sentinel AI, it was Evan's vision, his concept, from the very beginning. And just like that, with that simple admission, the remaining tension in the room didn't just dissipate. It recalibrated. The investors, the board members, they all turned towards me again. Not with polite curiosity this time, but with a different kind of attention. A dawning awareness, a palpable shift of gravity in the room. They weren't just looking at the newly appointed CTO. They were seeing the architect. The source. Recognition, finally. I leaned forward slightly in my chair, just enough to command attention without seeming aggressive. Sentinel AI wasn't built overnight, I said, my voice calm, steady, carrying easily in the quiet room. It represents years of conceptual development, 18 intensive months of around-the-clock coding, simulation, and refinement. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the table, meeting the gazes of the investors. It required a deep commitment to building not just a powerful defense, but an ethically grounded one, a system designed to protect critical infrastructure from threats that most organizations haven't even begun to anticipate yet. I let that sink in, then added one crucial line, my gaze perhaps lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Marcus. But technological protection, however advanced, is only truly effective when the system and the organization around it is guided by clarity, transparency, and unwavering integrity at all levels. The message landed, not with a bang, not with overt accusation, but with quiet, unmistakable precision. I didn't need to say more. I didn't need to rehash the previous day's disaster, because now they saw it. They understood the subtext. They saw not just the impressive machine on the screen, but the quiet, resolute architect sitting before them. And they understood implicitly that I wasn't asking for my space at the table anymore. I had claimed it. About 3 months later, Sentinel AI wasn't just an internal project anymore. It made international headlines. A major multinational bank based in Europe, one of Apex's first major clients post-funding, suffered a highly sophisticated, coordinated cyber attack. It was deep, complex, meticulously planned, designed to siphon over $500 million through a series of intricately masked, rapidly executed subtransactions across global networks. The initial breach bypassed the bank's traditional firewalls almost instantly. It evaded their existing intrusion detection software. The attack moved through their systems using techniques that perfectly mimicked the behavior of authorized high-level personnel, making it nearly invisible to standard security monitoring. It was the kind of attack that should have been catastrophic. But it didn't get past Sentinel AI. The system, running silently in the background of the bank's core infrastructure, flagged the initial intrusion anomaly just 43 seconds after the first malicious packet entered the network. By the 3-minute mark, Sentinel AI had not only identified the attack vectors but had also dynamically isolated the compromised segments of the network, traced the complex routing paths back towards their origin points, and preemptively blocked all suspicious outgoing financial transfers before a single dollar could leave the bank's control. No money was lost. No sensitive customer data was compromised. And remarkably, the entire defensive action was autonomous. No human intervention was required until after the threat was fully neutralized and contained. The story exploded. Major financial news outlets, tech journals, even mainstream media picked it up. Headlines read, "AI thinks like a human, defends like a fortress, saves bank from $500 million heist. The future of cybersecurity? Predictive AI stops unprecedented attack cold." The bank issued a public statement praising Sentinel AI's unprecedented predictive intelligence, its adaptive defense capabilities, and, notably, its robust ethical architecture that ensured defensive actions were precise and contained. It was the kind of public validation, the undeniable proof of concept on a global stage, that most tech creators only dream of. The kind of moment that should have felt like reaching the summit after a grueling climb. And yet, I didn't pop champagne corks. I didn't throw a lavish celebration party or hold a triumphant press conference basking in the glow. When the news broke, I was simply sitting in my office, my actual office now, spacious, with tall glass windows overlooking the bustling city, and watched the internal alert notification appear on my private administrative terminal for the Apex deployment. Sentinel AI Client B7 status. Integrity restored. Threat neutralized. Ethical parameters maintained. I read the words on the screen twice. Calm, green, steady. And then, a slow smile spread across my face. Not a smile of arrogance or vindication, but something quieter, deeper. Because that status update wasn't just about the system's performance. In a strange way, it felt like a mirror reflecting my own journey. That system, Sentinel AI, it had once been my entire world. My obsession, my refuge, the singular focus that consumed my every waking thought. I had poured so much of myself into its creation, weaving my own logic, my own ethics, my own relentless drive into its core, that for a long time, I wasn't sure where the code ended and I began. But somewhere along that difficult path, particularly in those fraught months leading up to my departure and return, I realized I had stopped just building Sentinel AI. I had started unconsciously reflecting it. Its vigilance against threats, both obvious and hidden. Its adaptability in the face of unexpected challenges. Its core directive to defend its integrity, its identity, without resorting to destructive tactics. Those weren't just lines of code or system functions anymore. They had become ingrained in me, too. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the intricate patterns of the city below. Cars weaving through the morning traffic like data packets on a network. Thousands of people rushing towards their own deadlines, meetings, challenges. And for the first time in what felt like a very long time, I didn't feel like I was racing to catch up, or lost in the complexity, or fighting against the current. I just felt present, grounded, whole. People ask me sometimes, usually colleagues or younger engineers I mentor now, how I managed to stay calm through the whole ordeal with Marcus. How I didn't break down when they tried to erase me, fire me, steal my work. How I found the strength, the strategy to navigate my way back not just into the company, but into a position of leadership with my name and ownership intact. The honest truth? I didn't always stay calm. Inside, there were moments of cold fury, of sickening betrayal, of profound doubt. I did break in small, invisible ways that no one else saw. But here's the key. Every time I felt that crack, that moment of pressure or pain, I treated it like Sentinel AI treats an anomaly. I used it as a data point. I analyzed it. Why did this happen? What vulnerability did it expose? How can I adapt? How can I strengthen the defenses? I learned. I adapted. I evolved. Just like the system I had created. And in doing so, through that process of self-analysis and adaptation under fire, I finally figured out the hardest part of building any defense, whether digital or personal, how to protect myself effectively. Not through building higher walls of isolation. Not through lashing out with destructive vengeance, but through achieving absolute clarity. Clarity about what was mine, my work, my values, my boundaries. Clarity about what I stood for, and clarity about how far I was willing to go, strategically and ethically, to guard that line. I turned away from the window, walked back over to my main console, and, almost on autopilot, ran a quick diagnostic query on the Sentinel AI core system. The response came back instantly, green across the board, stable, responsive, vigilant, just like I trained it. It learned how to survive. I whispered softly to the quiet room. Then, with a smile that felt less like triumph and more like a deep, settled peace, I added, and so did I. The day Apex Innovations went public was surreal. Trading opened, and the valuation soared, hitting $42 billion before noon. A frenzy of flashing camera bulbs on the stock exchange floor, thunderous applause, breathless headlines scrolling across financial news tickers. So many faces I barely recognized, slapping each other on the back, shaking hands, celebrating a monumental financial success built on a foundation they had once tried to fracture, a future they had tried to steal from me. But I wasn't standing center stage, beaming under the spotlights next to Marcus Thorne. By mutual, unspoken agreement, my role was quieter that day. I stood off to the side of the main platform, observing the controlled chaos with a sense of calm detachment. The feeling wasn't pride, exactly, or even vindication. It was more like perspective. Seeing the culmination, but knowing the whole story, the near-death experience that preceded the birth. Near the back of the crowded trading floor, almost hidden behind a large structural support beam, I spotted Sarah. She was leaning against it, arms crossed, her expression neutral, unreadable from this distance. Our eyes met across the throng of celebrating executives and traders. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She just gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. A quiet acknowledgement. A shared glance that spoke volumes about the history only the two of us fully understood. The small act of courage that had provided a crucial piece of leverage. Then, a voice cut through the background noise. "Mr. Carter?" I turned. A young woman, maybe early 20s, likely a junior developer or engineer flown in from one of our global R&D teams for the IPO celebration, stood there looking hesitant but determined. She clutched a company-issued tablet in one hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and maybe a little bit of awe. "Miss Camden, Mr. Carter, sorry. Can I ask you something?" She stammered slightly. I offered a small smile. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath. Then the question tumbled out, earnest and direct. "How did you do it?" We heard rumors about the beginning. How did you keep Sentinel AI, keep what you built from being, taken away? I looked at her for a long moment, seeing the genuine curiosity, perhaps even a hint of personal anxiety, behind the question. I could have given her a dozen answers about negotiating ironclad contracts, about strategic foresight, about building technical fail-safes, about leveraging evidence. But instead, I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice low, just for her. "It wasn't really about writing the perfect code," I said simply. "The hardest part? It was about correctly identifying the real threat." She blinked, looking puzzled. "What do you mean?" "We're trained, especially in security," I continued softly, "to think danger always comes from the outside. Hackers, competitors, malware. We build walls to keep them out." I paused. "But sometimes the most dangerous threat to what you build, to your creation, isn't external at all. Sometimes it's much closer. Sometimes it sits in the corner office. Sometimes it smiles at you during meetings. Sometimes," I added pointedly, "it even signs your paycheck." She nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful now, absorbing the implication. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder for a moment. "That's why you don't just focus on building brilliant things," I told her. "You also have to build boundaries around them. Protections. Not just firewalls in the code, but clear lines in your collaborations, in your agreements." I gave her shoulder a light squeeze. "You have to harden the edges, understand the vulnerabilities, technical and human. And maybe," I added with a knowing look, "leave a quiet little tripwire buried deep at the core. Because what you create is a piece of you. And trust me, no one else will ever guard it with the same vigilance that you do." She thanked me, her eyes shining with a newfound understanding, and then slipped back into the celebratory crowd. But her question lingered with me long after the closing bell rang. "So now I'll ask you the same thing. What would you do if everything you poured your heart and soul into, your work, your ideas, your reputation, your future, was suddenly on the verge of being taken from you by someone you trusted? Would you walk away quietly? Would you fight loudly? Or would you, perhaps, find a quieter, more strategic way? Would you silently embed a safeguard, a piece of your own resilience, into the very heart of your creation? So that even if they tried to erase your name, your voice would still be there, undeniably written into its structure, waiting for the right moment to speak its truth. Because ultimately, that's what survival often looks like in the real world. Not just enduring, but adapting, evolving, and learning that protecting your work, protecting your contribution, isn't about paranoia or selfishness. It's about fundamental self-respect. Respect for the effort, the creativity, the piece of yourself you invested. So here's my final thought, my last line of code for you today. Don't just build something amazing. Learn how to defend it. Don't just fight for credit. Fight for authorship, for the integrity of your contribution. And if or when they try to write you out of your own story, make damn sure the work itself still speaks, clearly and undeniably in your voice. If this story resonated with you today, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or had someone try to claim your hard work as their own, I truly want to hear about it. Share your experience or just your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me, how did you protect what mattered most to you? How did you find your strength? Sharing these stories helps us all learn and grow. And please, share this story with anyone you know who might be fighting their own battle to be seen, heard, and respected for their contributions. If you believe in the power of resilience, in defending what you create, consider subscribing to TK Revenge Story for more real-life accounts of quiet strength and ultimate redemption. Remember, the world doesn't just hand you authorship or respect. You have to claim it. You have to protect it. And maybe, just maybe, you need to build your own silent sentinel. And if you feel moved to support the channel and stories like this, the super thanks button is always appreciated. Sometimes, giving back is part of the healing process too. Thank you for listening. I'm Evan Carter, and I'm living proof that you can rewrite the ending.